If you were asked what you thought was the most challenging teaching that Jesus gives us, what's the most difficult part about being a Christian, how would you answer that question? What comes to mind? If not at the top of the list, I think close to the top is Jesus' commandment to us to love our enemies. I think at the end of the day, that's, if not the most difficult, certainly one of the most difficult teachings that Jesus gives us. This weekend's words from the gospel are taken from Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. So it's the pinnacle of his teaching. And he says to us, "You have heard it said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, offer no resistance to one who is evil." Offer no resistance to one who is evil. It's hard to think that that makes sense. Or how can that benefit anyone? Well, here's the thing. It's important to understand the context. The old teaching, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, was a very good thing indeed. This law was designed to limit violence and establish some measure of justice. It was meant by God to keep his people from going too far. Because the all too familiar human instinct was then, and it still is today, if you hurt me, I'm going to kill you. The old teaching of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth was meant to establish some sort of proportionality in a response, a measured response to evil. There's a good example of this or how the human instinct takes us toward a disproportionate response. There's a good example in the movie The Untouchables. I don't know if you remember that movie with Sean Connery and Kevin Costner. Sean Connery is this salty, gritty, tough as nails Chicago beat cop. And Kevin Costner is this ambitious, sort of hardlining FBI agent who really wants to take down Al Capone. So Sean Connery is giving him some advice, and he says to him, "They come at you with a knife, you bring a gun. He sends one of yours to the hospital, you send one of his to the morgue. That's the Chicago way." You see, that's exactly what an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth was meant to circumvent. So the old law that Jesus quotes is not a bad thing. But Jesus typically wants us to go beyond a certain way of thinking. He doesn't want simply justice to prevail, although he does want that. He wants love to prevail. And friends, the difficulty, I think, in our response to love when we're confronted with injustice is that we think that somehow love is less than justice. That love doesn't get us to where justice does. Love, friends, is not opposed to justice. Love goes beyond justice. So in today's gospel, with Jesus' improvement to the law, he wants to impress on us what, as Christians, we're called to, what we're called to be, and what we're called to do. And you and I are called to love. And I'm not talking about the pithy sentimentality, the butterflies in your stomach, although that's wonderful and good. I'm talking about the kind of love that God loves us with. And it's a love that wills the good, wants the good of the other for the sake of other, not for how it impacts me. You see, here we go. Friends, if love is wanting or willing the good of the other, love isn't dependent on the response of the one who is loved. Oftentimes, we measure out our love. I'll love you as long as you love me in response according to how I want you to love me. But friends, love isn't a tit for tat. True love isn't some line item on a balance sheet. It doesn't square away. You do this, and I'll do that. and we're even. That's not love, because love doesn't look for reciprocation. And this is so hard for us to understand, because the way in which we love others is not near the way that God loves us. And Jesus calls us to the heights of love because that's how we participate in God's way of loving. So Jesus says so powerfully in our gospel, and I love this line. He says, God makes the sun rise on the good and the bad alike. And he causes the rain to fall on the just and the unjust. Friends, that's such a powerful and important statement from our gospel, because God doesn't measure out love. He neither demands a response to his love. He invites us to respond, but he doesn't demand. God doesn't say, I'm going to love you more than I love you, or I'm going to love him more than I love her. God loves each and every one of us intensely, 100%, without holding back. And if love is desiring the good, the will of the other, then you can't force somebody to respond in return, because it's always an invitation. If God forces us to respond and love him in return, that's manipulation, it's coercion, it's what tyrants do, and that's not what God does. It's such a powerful statement. You see, God loves those who love him, and he loves those who don't love him. So Jesus continues to say, for if you love those who love you, what recompense will you have? What good is that? Even the tax collectors do that. Even the pagans do that. Friends, this is a great test of love that we have. And yet, we're all called to love that way. You may say, okay, but what difference does it make to me or my enemy if I love them? Why not settle for justice? Why love? Well, here it is. If love is really willing or wanting the good of the other, then the love that we offer will seek to convert, to transform that aggressive person, to lure that person into a better spiritual space. You see, loving someone who won't love you in return, it works to change that person. You know, often we think that there are only two options when it comes to when we're faced with injustice, when we're faced with hatred. We think there's just two options. You either fight or you flee. But love gives us a third way. By loving those who hate us, we're working to change the person, to transform them, to lift them up to a different spiritual space. But friends, this is so hard, isn't it? I mean, no one is saying that it's easy. And what makes it especially hard is that person's aggression or injustice, it stirs up in us negativity and fear and anger. So it makes it harder to respond with love. In the gospel, Jesus gives us two examples. He gives us examples of how difficult loving can be. And I'd like to just briefly focus on the first. So in the first example, there's this poor man who's deeply in debt. And so his creditor takes him to court, sues him, and literally takes the coat off the man's back. So what is this poor man to do? He doesn't have the resources to fight legally. He shouldn't run or acquiesce. Rather, he should try to lure his aggressor into a better spiritual space. And how does he do that? Jesus says he should hand over his shirt as well. So do you see what's going on? Jesus is saying, well, if he had the gall to do that, then stand there in the court, give him the shirt off your back, and stand there naked before him. You see, there's a quality of like rubbing it in, or better yet, of knocking sense into the person, exposing the person's aggression and injustice with loving vulnerability. Well, since you've done that to me, What I'm going to do is up the ante with love, was the man's response. Okay, you want my cloak? Well, here's my shirt as well. And then you stand there exposed. And what you're doing is you're exposing the aggression and the violence. You're acting as a mirror so the person can see what they're doing to you, hoping to lure them into a better spiritual space so they can see what they're doing, be humbled by it, and then ultimately be transformed. There's this great story of Mother Teresa. So one day she's in Calcutta and she comes across this orphan girl who's starving. She takes the girl by the hand and the both of them go over to a baker. She wants to get something for this little girl to eat. So the Mother Teresa asks the baker for a loaf of bread for this starving little girl. The baker spits in Mother Teresa's face. How do you think she responded? What do you think she did? She said, "Thank you for the gift for me. Now perhaps something for the little girl." Yeah, he gave her a loaf of bread after that. You see, she wasn't, by the way, often I think what we misunderstand with this commandment to love our enemies is we think we have to be a doormat. We think we have to allow people to walk all over us. That's not what Mother Teresa shows us in that example. She wasn't rolling over in the face of violence. Rather, she's actively engaging the aggression so as to turn it into something new. She's loving her enemy precisely by exposing him and helping him to see what's wrong. She's attempting to transform that wicked person from within, using love and nonviolence. Friends, is this a hard strategy? Oh yeah. Will it lead to times of you being taken advantage of? Of course it will. Will it cause a great deal of anguish? For sure. But tell me a strategy of engaging evil that doesn't involve these things. A strategy that takes a negative and makes it positive. Friends, for this week, as we're confronted with this difficult teaching, I invite you to be mindful of how you respond to injustice and aggression and hatred in your life. What do you do? When you're tempted to post something negative on Facebook or Snapchat or Instagram, something to get back at that person, don't do it. When you're hurt and you feel the need to get back at someone, don't. Choose to raise your enemy to a better spiritual place by loving your enemy. I pray that the Lord gives us the grace to love like He does, even when it comes to our enemies.